For 16 years, Rachel Kim was the unseen force turning raw numbers into million-dollar movements, the strategist whose fingerprints shaped victories that defined her company's rise. Yet in that boardroom, as champagne glasses clinked and executives praised visionary leadership, her name vanished as if she never existed. Campaigns, the data breakthroughs, the sleepless nights, it was all there on the screen, just without her. She sat in silence, a ghost in her own success story, watching others bask in the glow of a fire she had lit. But what no one knew was that Rachel had anticipated this betrayal. Every system, every model, every formula celebrated in that room still carried her invisible signature. They thought they could erase her. They thought she was replaceable. But soon, when the applause faded and the cracks began to show, the company would face a brutal realization. The only person capable of saving them was the one they had tried to erase. And Rachel was done playing invisible. Rachel Kim had always believed that data told the truth. Numbers did not flatter, did not deceive, did not lie to protect egos. They revealed patterns, exposed blind spots, and gave a voice to the customers most companies pretended to understand. For nearly a decade at her San Francisco SaaS firm, Rachel had poured herself into decoding those truths, refining every algorithm, every behavioral model, until she created InsightFlow, the predictive engine that transformed the company's trajectory. Didn't just work. It outperformed every forecast, generating revenue 4 times higher than the board had dared to project. But on this night, under the glow of crystal chandeliers and corporate applause, Rachel felt like she was watching a carefully staged illusion. A slideshow filled the ballroom screens, glossy charts, soaring revenue curves, animated testimonials from satisfied clients. Company cheered. And then came the reveal, the mastermind behind the breakthrough. Don, her manager, stood confidently on stage, smiling as the words visionary leadership appeared above his head. No mention of Rachel. Not a single acknowledgement of the person who had sacrificed years, sleep, and precious time with her daughter to make InsightFlow a reality. The room erupted in cheers. Champagne corks popped. Executives clapped Don on the back, praising his genius. Rachel's glass remained untouched in her hand. She scanned the crowd, half expecting someone, anyone, to speak her name. But silence pressed in like a verdict. She had been erased. When the bonuses were announced, the insult deepened. Dawn received the kind of reward that paid for luxury vacations, while Rachel's quarterly payout, once a recognition of her vital role, was cut entirely. Policy from the top, Dawn explained with a practiced shrug, as if bureaucracy were to blame rather than betrayal. She smiled faintly in response, but inside something fractured. In that moment, memories came rushing back uninvited. Her daughter's 8th birthday, celebrated without her, as Rachel sat in the office running late-night simulations to meet a deadline Dawn had promised to the board. Countless missed school plays, the dinners eaten alone at her desk, the voice messages from family she never had time to return. She had convinced herself it was worth it, that the payoff would come in recognition, respect, and the chance to build something lasting. But tonight proved the opposite. Rachel was not just invisible. She was expendable in the eyes of those who now celebrated atop her work. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a new resolve was forming. She wasn't going to fight for a seat at a table that had already decided she didn't belong. Instead, she would quietly hold on to the truth that everything they were building still depended on the system she alone had mastered. And when the cracks inevitably appeared, she would no longer be waiting in silence. Rachel did not erupt in anger, nor did she storm into Dawn's office demanding an explanation. That was not her way. Anger left a trail, silence left possibilities. Instead, she slipped into preparation mode, the kind of quiet strategy she had learned to master after years of being underestimated. While the rest of the company toasted Dawn's vision, Rachel sat at her desk the following morning, methodically creating a fortress of evidence. She saved Slack logs, conversations where Dawn had dismissed her concerns, where she had outlined models that later became his innovations. She organized draft files, version histories, raw datasets, and the coded architecture of InsightFlow itself. Every timestamp was a breadcrumb pointing to the truth. The system was hers. Then came the contracts. Rachel had fought for them long before this betrayal, almost as if she had sensed what was coming. 2 years earlier, during a tense budget meeting, Dawn had offhandedly called her an overpaid data nerd, suggesting that the company could save money by outsourcing her role to a cheaper offshore team. The insult had stung, but instead of lashing out, Rachel had hidden her anger in meticulous legal language. With Rebecca, the company's sharp but often overlooked in-house counsel, she had drafted a licensing clause. InsightFlow could only be used if her salary and bonus were paid in full. Compensation was altered, the license terminated immediately. Dawn had waved it off at the time, too arrogant to imagine the clause would ever matter. Now it mattered more than anything. As Rachel scrolled through the document, the words felt like a lifeline, a piece of foresight that turned her vulnerability into leverage. She thought of Dawn, smug on stage, and almost smiled. He believed he had taken everything. What he didn't realize was that the system driving the company's growth, the very engine the executives worshipped, was tethered to her continued recognition. Without her, InsightFlow was just an empty shell. She drafted an email to Rebecca. Contained no drama, no accusation, no trace of the storm brewing inside her. Just a single understated sentence: "There may be a license issue triggered soon." She hit send and closed her laptop with deliberate calm. In her private thoughts, Rachel reflected on how poetic it all felt. The man who once tried to push her out with insults had unknowingly handed her the weapon of his undoing. Every slight, every dismissal, every night she was made to feel invisible had crystallized into this moment of quiet control. Rachel was no longer waiting for recognition. She was building her silence into a strategy. And when the company discovered the trap it had set for itself, she would already be 2 steps ahead. 72 hours after the company refused to process Rachel's quarterly bonus, the first sign of trouble appeared. On the main executive dashboard, where bright graphs usually projected optimism, a single red warning replaced them all: license invalid. First, managers dismissed it as a technical hiccup. But within minutes, panic rippled outward. Entire revenue models disappeared, leaving Q3's forecast blank. The numbers that investors demanded were gone, not hidden, not delayed, just erased. Then came the errors cascading through client systems. Marketing platforms pinged back failures, and the APIs driving campaign personalization returned the same dreaded code again and again: 4003 unauthorized access. Engineers rushed to reboot servers, but every attempt ended the same way. The system was not broken, it was deliberately shutting them out. Inside the building, tension thickened. Don barked orders, his voice cracking under the pressure. He pointed fingers at vendors, claiming some third-party issue had corrupted data streams. But the technical team knew better. They could trace the shutdown sequence back to one place: InsightFlow's license validation. Clean, precise, triggered exactly 72 hours after the company withheld Rachel's compensation. Rebecca, the company's legal counsel, sat silently in the corner of the meeting until she could no longer ignore what she held in her hands. She had pulled up Rachel's contract, the one Dawn had once mocked for being overly detailed. There it was, an explicit clause binding system usage to full and timely compensation. No bonus, no license. Dawn's dismissal of Rachel had not only been cruel, it had been catastrophic. Company was now in violation, and the system was enforcing it without mercy. Inside the corporate bubble, the damage multiplied. Investors who had been promised a record-breaking quarter now received empty reports. Their frustration quickly escalated into threats. Calls bombarded the boardroom, each one louder than the last, demanding answers the executives could not provide. Clients, too, grew restless. Campaigns failed, targeting collapsed, customer acquisition costs skyrocketed overnight. Within days, trust, the company's most valuable currency, was in freefall. And while the storm raged, Rachel remained unervingly calm. Cut off from Slack, her calendar stripped of meetings, her presence erased as if she had never mattered. Yet in her home office she sat with pen in hand, writing with quiet precision. Line by line, she cataloged the 87 systems tied directly to InsightFlow's algorithms. From revenue forecasting and churn prediction to ad optimization and customer segmentation, she mapped the full extent of their dependency. Her demeanor was not vengeful. There was no satisfaction in her gaze, no bitterness in her tone, only clarity. She had always known the company underestimated her work, treating it as just another tool rather than the backbone of their entire operation. Now, every outage, every panicked investor call, every furious client proved what they had refused to see. Rachel was not optional. Her system was not replaceable. And their downfall had begun the very moment they decided her name did not deserve to be on the report. Would you like me to make this part end with a subtle cliffhanger line that sets up the next scene, hinting that Rachel already has her next move in mind while the company crumbles? The collapse left the executives with no more room to maneuver. Dawn had lost credibility, Rebecca had confirmed the breach, and the board was in open revolt. At last, the CEO himself, a man usually untouchable and insulated behind layers of assistants, had no choice but to reach out directly to Rachel. His call came through her phone late in the evening, his name flashing across the screen like an overdue reckoning. Rachel did not answer. Instead, she forwarded the matter to her attorney, who drafted a short but devastating response. The demands were simple, precise, and impossible to misinterpret. First, immediate payment of the withheld bonus plus a 40% penalty for breach of contract. Second, a six-figure buyout fee to permanently acquire the licensing rights to InsightFlow, freeing the company from its dependency but acknowledging the true scale of its value. And third, a public statement, clear, documented recognition of Rachel's authorship and contribution, correcting the record that had so conveniently erased her name. The message landed in the CEO's inbox like a silent grenade. He gathered his leadership team, their faces pale under fluorescent lights as the weight of the terms sank in. Some argued they could negotiate. Others warned that Rachel had the upper hand. Every minute of downtime cost millions, every investor call deepened the crisis. Choice was not between paying Rachel or not, it was between survival and collapse. At last, the CEO scheduled a second call, this time to deliver the words he had never imagined himself saying. His tone, stripped of arrogance, carried an edge of resignation. "We should have paid you what you earned." It was not an apology, not entirely, but it was the closest his pride would allow. Rachel listened in silence, her breathing steady. She was not moved by his sudden humility, nor distracted by the desperation laced beneath his words. She had been overlooked too many times, her name stolen, her work dismissed. She would not let sentiment undo the discipline that had carried her here. When she spoke, her voice was calm, unwavering, almost clinical in its control. "You have 24 hours. After that, I escalate this to our external partners." There was no threat in her delivery, only certainty. She knew what escalation meant. Investors informed, industry press notified, regulatory bodies alerted. Company's reputation would not merely stumble, it would disintegrate in full view of the world. The CEO understood. So did the silent executives listening on the line, each realizing how completely Rachel had turned the tables. For Rachel, this was not revenge. It was alignment. Company had violated trust, underestimated her, and gambled with her integrity. Now the balance was restored on her terms. She ended the call without flourish, leaving the weight of the countdown to settle over them. Clock had begun to tick, and for once they were the ones running out of time. "Do you want me to make the next scene, resolution, highlight Rachel's personal victory, like how she reinvests her leverage into something bigger than just beating the company?" The next day, the company capitulated. Payments were wired, penalties acknowledged, and a formal acknowledgement letter, signed by the CEO himself, arrived in Rachel's inbox. Within minutes of confirmation, InsightFlow's license revalidated, and the dashboards that had stood dark and broken flickered back to life. The data flowed again, revenues reappeared, and anxious investor calls quieted down. To the outside world, the crisis seemed to vanish as quickly as it had begun. But inside the company, the scars would not heal so easily. Rachel, however, had no intention of staying. The restored system was no longer hers to rescue. Her work had been taken for granted, her loyalty misused, and she knew better than to trust promises made under duress. With calm precision, she drafted her resignation. It was not emotional nor vengeful but matter of fact. She would leave on her terms, carrying nothing except her expertise and her renewed conviction. For Rachel, the true win was not keeping the system alive for the company, it was reclaiming her voice and setting the price for her value. Soon after, she launched her independent consultancy. No longer bound to one employer, she chose her clients with care, ensuring her time was paid in respect as much as in dollars. Word of her work spread quickly. Companies sought not just her tools but her discipline, her clarity, her ability to see patterns where others drowned in noise. She no longer worked late nights to prove herself, nor missed family milestones to chase a quarterly metric. She was building something sustainable, grounded in balance and ownership. Meanwhile, Dawn and the senior leadership could not so easily repair their reputations. The board, once persuaded by their bravado, now viewed them with skepticism. Their failure to protect the company from such a self-inflicted crisis was a stain that no quarterly rebound could erase. In private meetings, whispers circulated about leadership changes, about replacing arrogance with competence, about the costly lesson of underestimating the very people who built the foundation of their success. From her perspective, Rachel carried 3 lessons forward, sharing them not just with herself but with anyone who might listen. First, never allow others to define your value, no matter how polished their titles or loud their voices. Value is lived, created, and defended, not handed down. Second, contracts are not just paperwork, they are shields when respect fails. Words of praise may fade, but legal agreements endure when integrity is tested. And third, silent preparation always beats loud confrontation. She had not needed to shout or beg. She had prepared, waited, and acted when the time was right. For Rachel, this was not a story of revenge, but of restoration. She had walked into the storm underestimated and dismissed. She walked out untouchable, her dignity intact, her future self-directed. And as she looked ahead, the lesson remained clear. Power is not in the noise of the room, but in the quiet certainty of knowing your worth.